This is your AP Government video on voter turnout. Voter turnout is the number of people who actually voted in an election divided by the number of people who were age eligible, meaning you had to be at least 18 and eligible to vote, like being a non-felon. It is not the number of people who voted compared to the people who registered. So there are lots of people who are eligible to vote and they don't register at all. And then there are people who are registered but don't actually turn out to vote. In most American elections, the presidential race is the one where we have the highest voter turnout. Those happen every 4 years, and turnout is generally around 55%. Although there are interesting elections where voter turnout is much higher, like the 2020 presidential race, where it was higher than 65% in most places. In the midterm elections, which are federal elections that happen every 2 years between the presidential races, turnout is usually in the 30 to 40%. And then it's lower for state and local elections. So our voter turnout percentage is very low, considering that we have a lot of democracy and a lot of individual rights and freedoms that people say that they want to protect. The amount of people that actually vote is not only low, it's much lower than similar democratic countries. We've also seen a decline in voter turnout since 1960 in our country, with a few exceptions. There's lots of reasons why the U.S. has low voter turnout, especially comparatively to other countries. We require that people register. Every state except for North Dakota, you have to fill out a registration form 30 to 60 days before the election. Lots of other countries just automatically register people or allow you to register on the day of the election. We also have ballot fatigue. The U.S. has way more elections than most other countries, and we have a lot more offices to vote for on the ballot. So what happens is people are really excited to vote for the presidential race because it's covered widely by the media and they're aware of the candidates. And then they might know their senators and representatives or the governor candidate. And then as you move down the ballot into the smaller and smaller races, you actually might not have ever heard of that particular race. You might not know anybody in it. And then it takes you a while or some time for you to study and learn about the candidates in order for you to be an educated voter. What happens is people end up just leaving those races open. Those are called down ballot races. And some of those low ones down, small local elections like state mine inspector or local constable. You might not even know what those offices are, and therefore you just leave it blank on your ballot. So we have a lot of elections. Typically, the federal elections happen every 2 years in November. State and local governments, although can have their elections whenever they decide to have them. So generally, people vote in the presidential or governor's race more than legislative races. They also tend to vote in larger numbers in the general more than the political primaries. And they tend to vote in national races more than state, and state races more than local. There's lots of reasons why people have trouble voting. An absentee ballot is also referred to as a mail-in ballot. It used to be that you had to prove that you were an American citizen who was temporarily living overseas in order to mail in your vote. This is obviously for business people or for members of the military. Well, over the last 30 years or so, we have made it very easy for people of all types to mail in their ballot. And in fact, some states require that you mail in your ballot. And states like Arizona, about 85% of Arizona voters vote by mail, even if they are living in the locality. Mailing in your ballot makes it easy. You can take some time filling out and researching all of the various up and down ballot races so you can be an educated voter. And you also don't have to wait in line sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours in order to vote on election day. When we passed the 26th Amendment and we lowered the voting age to 18, that created a lot of young people who are now age eligible to vote. But young people who are age 18 to 24 are the least likely voters of any demographic group in the country. So when we add more young people to the voting rolls, we see a natural decline in voter turnout percentages. The U.S. also has a lack of efficacy. Efficacy has the same root word as effectiveness. People don't think their vote matters. They don't think that protest matters. Why should I participate? It's already rigged. There is this sense that even though we have all this freedom, that the system is working for somebody else but not me. And if you have really low political efficacy, then you might not want to waste your time. We also hear from a lot of non-voters that they don't like either of the candidates. Because we have only two major political parties, when it comes to most races in the general election, you have one Republican and one Democrat. This has been particularly true for the last couple presidential cycles in 2020 and in 2016. If you don't like either of the candidates, do you waste your time voting for the one you think is the least worst, or do you just skip voting altogether? And typically people who skip voting then are going to skip all of the races, not just the presidential one. Because we only have two major political parties and we therefore only generally have two big candidates, that creates a lack of strong competition. In multi-party systems, there are often, 4, 5, 6, 7 candidates to choose from. It's easier for you to find a candidate that you identify a lot of the time. One of the reasons why our political primary gives us candidates that we dislike is because the primary is people who vote in the primary are very liberal and very conservative people who are very involved in politics. Average people who might be a little more moderate do not typically vote in the primary. So we end up getting the most liberal or the most conservative candidate most of the time. And average people are more moderate than that. And therefore they don't like the policies of either candidate. Our parties are also really weak. They don't have a lot of legal power to force you to vote a certain way, to force candidates to say or do certain things. You are free to be part of whatever party you want, or no party at all, which we call independent. But again, even if somebody is running as a candidate, let's say as a Democrat, the Democratic Party cannot stop them from running, and they can't make them vote certain ways on laws. People are allowed to vote their conscience, and they do not have to vote with the party. The party does not control the voters or the candidates. All right, Active Learning 3 is a series of discussion questions. All right, A, name 2 reasons why Americans tend not to vote. B, do you believe that the media helps or hurts the electoral process? And C, who do you think is most trustworthy and why, the government or the media? And yes, you have to pick an answer.